My foster dad told me to stay quiet. 12-year-old Marcus whispered it to a Hell's Angel on a rain-soaked street, pulling up his sleeve to show the bruises. Rocco listened, then asked, where does he keep his records? He didn't know about the locked basement, the dusty piles of children's belongings. Within hours, a convoy of bikers assembled, headlights cutting the night. The next move wasn't a conversation. It was a raid. Marcus wasn't the first child in that house. He was just the first one brave enough to run. Because behind that quiet suburban door, a state-approved foster father was running a trafficking pipeline that had swallowed dozens of kids. No one believed them. No one investigated. Until a 12-year-old boy begged a biker for help, and an army of outlaws became the only law that listened. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand what Marcus was running from. He wasn't just running from bruises. He was running from a house that the state of California had paid to keep him safe, a foster home with a 5-star rating, annual inspections, and a file full of glowing reports. But inside, the man who ran it, Gregory Simmons, was running something else entirely, a pipeline. Simmons had been a foster parent for 11 years. In that time, 43 children had passed through his doors. Only 31 had come out the other side. The other 12 transferred, the paperwork said. Reunified with biological family, the forms claimed. But those forms were lies. The truth was in a locked basement where Simmons kept suitcases of children's clothes, toys, and school IDs, trophies from kids who had simply vanished into a trafficking network that stretched across 3 states. Marcus landed there at 10 years old after his grandmother died. No other family, no one to ask questions. He was a quiet kid, small for his age, easy to intimidate. Simmons liked that. For 2 years, Marcus endured beatings, starvation, and threats that if he ever told anyone, he'd end up like the others. He learned to keep his head down. He learned to lie to the social workers who visited once a month. He learned that no one was coming to save him. But then Simmons brought in a new girl. Her name was Tanya. She was 8. And when Marcus saw the same pattern starting, the locked door, the whispered phone calls, the strangers picking kids up at night, something in him snapped. That night when Simmons was passed out drunk, Marcus pried open the basement door. What he saw in that room still haunts him. Shoes. Dozens of children's shoes lined up like a memorial, backpacks with names written in marker, and in the corner a small purple jacket he recognized. It belonged to a boy named David who had gone home 6 months earlier. Marcus ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to find someone who wouldn't call social services, someone the system didn't control. Rain hammered the streets of Stockton as he stumbled toward the industrial side of town, toward the only place he remembered his grandmother warning him to avoid. A biker bar. Because in his 12-year-old logic, bad men might be the only ones who would believe him about worse men. And that's when he saw the row of Harleys and the giant man with Hell's Angels on his back, and he made the choice that would burn a trafficking ring to the ground. Rocco, the biker, wasn't just any member. He was a chapter enforcer with a daughter of his own and a past he never spoke about, a childhood spent in group homes where nobody listened. When that shivering boy pulled up his sleeve, Rocco didn't flinch. He just asked one question: where does he keep his records? Because Rocco knew that to tear down a monster you needed proof. And that question set in motion something the system had never tried. A raid planned by outlaws, executed with military precision, and aimed at a man who thought he was untouchable. By midnight, 60 bikes would be rolling. By dawn, a foster home would be a crime scene. Rocco didn't call the police. He called his road captain, a man named Spider who had served 8 years in military intelligence before trading uniforms for leather. Spider told Rocco to keep the kid safe, then hung up and made 3 calls. The first was to a retired detective in Sacramento who owed the club a favor from a decade-old missing persons case. The second was to a computer forensics specialist who'd done contract work for the club's legal defense fund. The third was to the chapter president, a man known only as Chief, who listened for 30 seconds before saying 2 words: "Get proof." Within 2 hours, 7 bikers were sitting in Rocco's garage around a folding table covered in coffee cups and a map of Stockton. Marcus sat in the corner, wrapped in a leather jacket 3 sizes too big, wolfing down a burger like he hadn't eaten in days, which he hadn't. Spider laid out the situation. The foster home was in a quiet residential neighborhood, which meant they couldn't just roll up with 60 bikes and kick the door down. They needed to be smart. They needed to be ghosts. But here's what none of them knew yet. Simmons had a partner, a caseworker named Linda Faraday inside the county social services office, who for years had been steering the most vulnerable kids toward Simmons's home. She'd falsified reports, buried complaints, and in return, Simmons paid her a cut from every child trafficked. That partnership was the lock that kept the whole grim machine running. That night, Linda Faraday had just emailed Simmons a warning. A neighbor had reported seeing a boy running from the house, and someone had mentioned bikers. When Spider's team intercepted that email 3 hours later through their forensics contact, they realized the clock had just jumped. Simmons had been tipped off. If they didn't move now, evidence would disappear and Marcus would be the only witness left. They scrapped the careful plan. Chief made the call, "We ride tonight." 11 p.m. the bikes ignited. Not 60, that would come later, but 15. A small surgical team, each man carrying a specific role. Spider led with the tactical plan. Rocco rode point with Marcus on the back of his Harley, the kid clinging to his vest. A former Army medic named Doc brought a trauma kit because no one knew what they'd find. And a man they called Cutter carried bolt cutters, a crowbar, and a body camera, because if they were going to do this, they were going to do it in a way that no system could ignore. The house at 421 Oakdale was dark when they arrived, but there was a minivan in the driveway with the back hatch open. Suitcases. Simmons was already packing to run. Spider split the team. 4 men went around back to cut the phone line and block any exits. Rocco, Doc, and Cutter went through the front door using a battering ram made from a 40-pound steel bar. The frame splintered on the first hit. Simmons never had a chance to react. In the living room, they found 2 children, a girl and a younger boy, huddled under a blanket, eyes wide with terror. The girl pointed toward the basement without a word. When Cutter cut the padlock off that basement door, the smell hit them first. Mildew, old sweat. Fear so soaked into the concrete it had its own atmosphere. And then the flashlight beams found the evidence. Stacked cardboard boxes full of children's clothes, sorted by size. A filing cabinet with medical records for kids who were supposed to be in other states. A whiteboard on the wall with names, dates, dollar amounts. And on a shelf in the corner, a collection of stuffed animals, each tagged with a child's initials. One of them, a worn teddy bear with a missing eye, had the initials DM sewn into its paw. David Martinez, the boy who'd gone home 6 months ago, whose purple jacket Marcus had recognized. Doc found a locked filing cabinet in the back room. Inside, they discovered something worse than any of them had prepared for. Simmons hadn't just been trafficking kids. He'd been documenting it. Photos, receipts, bank transfers to accounts in Nevada and Arizona, names of buyers, dates of transactions, and a ledger that included the names of 3 other foster homes in the network, all run by people who'd passed state background checks, all with caseworkers like Linda Faraday greasing the wheels. This wasn't one bad man. This was an industry. But the most damning thing in that basement, a stack of letters from kids who tried to tell someone. Letters addressed to teachers, to principals, to social workers. Every single one of them marked in red ink, handled, because Linda Faraday had intercepted them before they ever left the system. Caseworkers were supposed to be the safeguards. Instead, they were the gatekeepers. Simmons had even kept the letters as insurance, proof that the system was complicit. And now that proof was in the hands of 15 bikers. Upstairs, Rocco had Simmons pinned to the floor with a knee in his spine and zip ties around his wrists. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching. For 2 years, this man had been his jailer. Now, the 12-year-old walked forward, bent down, and said 3 words that cut through the chaos. "You don't scare me anymore." Rocco would later say that single moment was worth every risk they took. By 2 a.m., Spider was on the phone with a contact at the FBI's Sacramento field office, a woman he'd served within military intelligence years ago. She was skeptical at first. Then Spider emailed her 37 photos of the basement, the ledgers, and the whiteboard. 10 minutes later, her supervisor was on the line. By 5 a.m., A joint task force of FBI agents and county sheriff's deputies had secured the house. By sunrise, Simmons and Faraday were in custody. And by the time the morning news crews arrived, the full scale of the horror was starting to spill out. 21 trafficked children identified across 3 states, 11 arrests within 48 hours, and a system that had to explain how it had failed so catastrophically. But the bikers didn't leave when the authorities showed up. They stayed. They stayed for Marcus and Tanya and the 2 kids found in the living room. Because here's the thing that nobody outside the club understood. Those men weren't just rough men on loud bikes. They were fathers and uncles and men who remembered what it felt like when nobody believed them. And when the FBI agents started asking questions, Rocco made sure Marcus never had to answer alone. He sat beside the boy for every interview, one massive hand resting on the table, a silent promise that this time, somebody was listening. The manhunt that unfolded over the following days would expose politicians, judges, and a network that stretched across state lines. But for now, in that first gray light of dawn, the bikers had accomplished what 11 years of state inspections had not. They had opened a locked door and let the truth pour out. And the truth, once it started pouring, would drown a lot more people than Gregory Simmons. And the truth, once it started pouring, would drown a lot more people than Gregory Simmons. Within 48 hours of that raid, the FBI had seized Simmons's computers, his ledgers, and his phone records. What they found connected him to 7 other foster homes across California, Nevada, and Arizona, each with a similar setup, each with a caseworker like Linda Faraday on the payroll, each with a basement or a locked shed that held children's belongings cataloged like inventory. The trafficking ring wasn't a single rotten apple. It was a barrel full of them, and the barrel had been built by the state. Agents traced the money through shell companies in 3 states. They found payments to a sitting county supervisor, 2 juvenile court judges, and a state assemblyman's chief of staff, all of whom had voted against foster care oversight bills for years. Suddenly, a case that had started with a 12-year-old boy and a biker in the rain was pulling down institutions that had stood for decades. And the people inside those institutions started to panic. 4 days after the raid, Spider got a call from the FBI field agent in charge. Someone inside the Department of Justice wanted the case moved to a lower-profile team. A bureaucrat with ties to the assemblyman's office was trying to bury it. Spider hung up, walked into the clubhouse where Rocco and the others were watching over Marcus, and said 6 words that changed everything. "They're trying to make this disappear." Chief didn't blink. He told Spider to release the bodycam footage, all of it, not to the FBI, to the press. But releasing the footage was a gamble. If the Hells Angels went public, they'd expose not just the trafficking ring but their own unorthodox methods, breaking into a house, zip-tying a foster parent, bypassing law enforcement entirely. They could be charged with kidnapping, breaking, and entering obstruction. But Chief weighed the risk against the alternative, a cover-up that left kids in danger, and made the call. At noon on the 5th day, Cutter's bodycam footage hit every major news network, along with a statement from the club's attorney. The footage showed the locked basement door, the filing cabinets, the whiteboard with dollar amounts, and Simmons on the floor with Rocco's knee in his back. It showed Marcus, a small boy in an oversized leather jacket, walking into frame and telling his abuser, "You don't scare me anymore." America saw that footage and exploded. Social media went into overdrive. The local Child Protective Services office had its phone lines jammed with angry callers. Within hours, the county supervisor resigned, citing health reasons. The 2 judges were put on administrative leave pending investigation. The state assemblyman held a press conference claiming ignorance, but his chief of staff was already in FBI custody. The cover-up collapsed under the weight of public fury. But here's the part that nobody saw coming. The trafficking ring was just the surface. When Spider's forensic contact finally cracked the encryption on Simmons's off-site backup drive, they found a second ledger, one that detailed transactions with international buyers. Kids weren't just being moved between states. They were being sold across borders to buyers in Mexico, Canada, and as far as Eastern Europe. The ring had generated an estimated $16 million over 8 years. And Linda Faraday, the caseworker, wasn't just a greedy bureaucrat. She'd been the architect. She had designed the system that funneled children with no family ties, kids like Marcus, whose grandmother had died, into homes like Simmons's, where they'd vanish without anyone noticing. She'd even trained other caseworkers on how to falsify court reports and bypass federal tracking systems. That revelation landed like a bomb in the middle of the investigation. The FBI had to bring in Interpol. The case expanded from 3 states to 11, then 17. Arrest warrants went out for 53 more individuals, including 2 former foster care administrators who had since retired to Costa Rica. And in the middle of this international unraveling, the bikers stayed exactly where they'd been from the start, with the kids. Rocco personally drove Marcus to every interview, every medical exam, every therapy session. The club set up a rotation so that there was always someone at the safe house where the surviving children were being held for protection. When investigators needed to walk a child through a testimony, Doc, the Army medic, the man with the softest voice, sat beside them, explaining the process like a gentle uncle. The FBI agents, initially skeptical, came to rely on these men. One agent later testified that the bikers had done more to earn the kids' trust in 2 weeks than the system had done in years. But the deeper the investigation went, the more dangerous it became. 2 weeks after the raid, Spider's forensics contact had his office broken into. His backup drives were stolen. A week later, a fire destroyed the garage where Cutter had been storing duplicate evidence. Nobody was injured, but the message was clear. Powerful people were still desperate to silence the truth. The club went on high alert. Chief called in reinforcements from chapters in 5 other states. For the first time in Hell's Angels history, they were not protecting their own. They were protecting children who had no one else. And then came the phone call that turned everything upside down. It was the FBI agent in charge of the International Task Force. He told Spider they'd identified a buyer in Switzerland, a man with diplomatic immunity who had purchased children through Simmons's network for more than 2 years. Swiss authorities were refusing to cooperate. The agent's voice was tight. Unless we can get physical evidence delivered to the U.S. Embassy in Bern within 48 hours, this man vanishes, and half the international buyers go with him. Spider looked at the map on the wall, at the 8 children in the safe house, at the 12-year-old boy who'd started it all by asking a biker for help. Then he made the call that would define the next chapter of this story, a call that would send a convoy of bikes on a journey across 3 countries, with a teddy bear as the key piece of evidence, and turn a local raid into an international reckoning. Spider's call was to a man in Berlin, a former military intelligence colleague who now ran a private security firm with offices across Europe. The plan was audacious. Fly a 4-man team to Zurich with a diplomatic courier the FBI had quietly authorized, stake out the Swiss buyer's estate and deliver the evidence. David's stuffed bear, vacuum-sealed and chain of custody intact, directly to the embassy. But the clock was brutal. 48 hours wasn't enough for legal extradition protocols. It was barely enough for a motorcycle run if you factored in the mountain passes. That's when the Hells Angels international network kicked in. Within 6 hours, a charter plane had touched down in Stockton carrying 3 members of the Angels Frankfurt chapter, men who knew the roads from Zurich to Bern better than most locals. They brought a hard-sided evidence case and a sworn affidavit from a German federal prosecutor who'd agreed to witness the transfer. By midnight, the bear was airborne. The handoff at the U.S. Embassy in Bern happened with 17 minutes to spare. A forensic team swabbed the bear's stuffing and found what Simmons had never expected anyone to look for: a microSD card sewn inside the fabric containing spreadsheets of every international transaction, including bank accounts in the Caymans, wire transfer confirmations, and encrypted messages from the Swiss diplomat bragging about his shipments. The diplomat was arrested at his Zurich penthouse the next morning. His immunity was waived within a week under a mountain of evidence and international pressure. That arrest cracked the international ring wide open. Over the following months, authorities in 11 countries executed coordinated raids, rescuing 38 more children and filing charges against 91 individuals. The trafficking network that had operated in the shadows for nearly a decade was dismantled, and the U.S. foster care system was forced to confront the catastrophic failure that had let it happen. Linda Faraday, the caseworker who had orchestrated the pipeline, was convicted on 47 counts of human trafficking, conspiracy, and child endangerment. She'll spend the rest of her life in federal prison. Gregory Simmons got life without parole, but not before agreeing to testify, providing the roadmap that brought down the judges, the assemblyman's aide, and the county supervisor. The corrupt officials didn't just lose their jobs, they were led out of courthouses in handcuffs on network television. But the true measure of that night isn't in the convictions. It's in what happened to the children who survived. Marcus was adopted within a year by a family that Rocco personally vetted, a retired couple from the Sierra foothills who'd raised 4 kids of their own and still had room in their hearts. Rocco became Marcus's legal guardian ad litem, a role normally reserved for attorneys, but the judge signed off after Rocco showed up to every hearing in a suit jacket over his tattoos. Today, Marcus plays varsity basketball, writes poetry, and volunteers at a local youth shelter. The last time he was asked about that rainy night, he said simply, "He didn't see a bad kid, he saw me." Tanya, the 8-year-old girl, was reunited with a biological aunt who had spent years trying to find her, stonewalled at every turn by Faraday's office. The aunt later testified that, without the bikers' raid, she would never have known Tanya was still alive. 2 other children from the house were placed with loving families through a new independent oversight panel, one that included a Hell's Angel as a community advisor, a move that drew criticism at first but became a model for reform when the Angels' involvement dropped recidivism rates among at-risk placements to near zero. And then there's the final detail, the one that still sends chills through the case agents. When the FBI cataloged all the evidence from Simmons's basement, they found a small, locked box that nobody had been able to open. Cutter, the biker with the body cam, recognized the lock type from an old military footlocker and drilled it open. Inside were birth certificates, 27 of them originals, for children who had been reported missing over 15 years and never located. Among them was a certificate for a baby boy who had been taken from a hospital in Reno in 1998. That baby had grown up in foster care, aged out, and become a welder. His name was Dalton, middle name, Ryder. He was the younger brother of Spider, the road captain who had helped plan the raid. Spider had been searching for his brother for 26 years. He found him because a 12-year-old stranger ran to a biker for help. That reunion, when Spider and Dalton met at the safe house, with Marcus watching from the doorway, is permanently etched into the club's memory. It's why the Angels now run an international missing children initiative, funded by the very members who once were chased away by police simply for how they looked. And it's why, on the anniversary of that raid, a convoy of bikes makes the same ride from Stockton to the Sierra foothills, not to raid a house, but to deliver toys to a youth shelter that bears Marcus's name. That shelter sits on the same lot where a bar once stood, the bar where a terrified boy stumbled in from the rain, sure he was out of options. And that's the thing that echoes long after the headlines fade. The system had social workers, inspectors, judges, and 1,000 forms to fill out. It had everything it needed to see what was happening, and it didn't. Instead, a group of men the world had written off as outlaws and troublemakers became the only net that caught those kids before they vanished forever. So let me ask you something. If a soaked, bruised kid walked up to you today, shaking, afraid, carrying a secret heavier than he can hold, would you be the one who listens? Or would you pull the curtain shut? It's not a hypothetical for a lot of people. Right now, somewhere, a child is counting on a stranger to be the first person who doesn't look away. The Hells Angels didn't fix the whole broken system that night. They just opened a door. But that's where healing always starts. And the real legacy isn't the convictions or the international manhunts. It's the quiet decision to see a child, not a case file. To see a biker, not a threat. To believe that kindness doesn't run background checks. If this story moved you, drop a heart in the comments so the algorithm knows it matters. Pay surprise by hitting subscribe. It's how you vote for stories like this to keep getting told. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the people society least expects are sometimes the ones who show up when the whole world says no. Because out there, right now, somebody's still knocking. Be the seventh door.